kidding me.
Trying to reconnect.
Here we go. Live, Facebook Live. Pond Boss, Bob Lusk here.
Dale Baden here.
And Dale Baden with Texas Hunter
Texas
Feeders.
Hunter Products.
That's right, Texas Hunter Products.
Here we are in San Antonio. Good to have you here, Bob.
Hey, so I'm glad to be here, buddy. We're going to have a big time for the next hour. We're going to talk about feeding fish. I've got a little list of questions right here that people have sent in, and we're going to ask a bunch of those, or answer a bunch of those questions. But we're also going to talk about what Texas Hunter does, how you guys do it, where you are, you know, all the different products.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, depending on how many questions we get, we might just wander through the building a little bit and show a bunch of products.
We look forward. We've got a lot to show you.
That'd be a lot of fun. All right, you know, but first, our commercial. Pond Boss Magazine. $35 a year is all it costs. You know, I don't know what you do with your bride, but when we go out on a Friday night, we spend $35 at going out to dinner. It's a great date. Don't misunderstand me there. But Pond Boss Magazine is well worth the value. So take a look at that. PondBoss.com or even on the Facebook page. I see Leanne is clicked in and watching us, our marketing director with Pond Boss. Brian Lawrence, welcome. I'm going to take a minute here, and I like to watch it on the laptop because I can control the questions, so it should pop up on my laptop here in just a second when it does. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and tackle a couple of these questions, then we're going to get into after a few more people join up. Jason Nepstad is on. He's a loyal faithful. I don't think Jason's missed one yet, Dale.
That's outstanding.
Yeah, this is like our sixth
Smart.
or seventh. Yeah, so it's going to be a good time. I'm going to tackle some of these questions here while we wait for a few more people to join us. We've got 11 people on board, looks like. Grant Rogers asked, what are the types of alternative forage food for bass and catfish besides bluegill and fathead minnows? Well, the answer to that question is it depends on where you live. If you live up north, you know, north of the Mason-Dixon line, look at pumpkin seeds. And it depends on your goals as well. If your goals are to grow big catfish, then you need to feed those fish. Funny that we might mention that, feeding fish. We're going to talk about that a lot more in depth here in just a minute. Golden shiners can be a good choice, but got to know that bluegills are the backbone of the food chain for largemouth bass. So, if you don't want to grow bass, then you need to look at other forage fish. Like with channel catfish, fathead minnows are the best choice for that. Ryan Johnson says, cost-effective ways to improve your pond. And followed up right after that, Scott Lindsay says, I like Mr. Johnson's idea. What money is best spent to improve an existing pond? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you got to be able to know what needs to be improved. You know, so we start off with our goals. You know, where do you want to go? What is it that you want to get to? What are the goals? And then you got to figure out where you are. So I think the money best spent on improving a pond is to figure out what you need to do to improve it. Then you come up with a game plan on what to do to improve it. That could be feeding fish. That could be supplemental stocking. That could be amending the water quality. It could be a number of things like that. So that answer is pretty well contingent on, you know, what your goals are. And then again, it also kind of is contingent on your pond. Do you have a lot of shallow water? If you do, you need to get rid of shallow water because it's going to grow a lot of vegetation, unless you want a lot of vegetation because you want to attract waterfowl. So it all starts with your goals, and then a game plan can be developed once you figure out, you know, where you are. So figuring out the status of your pond and its fishery, that's one of the first things that you should do. Then when you have that, then you can start looking at the best ways to spend money. Here's a true world story. I gave a speech, Dale, I don't know, at a feed store in Mineral Wells, Texas a couple years ago. And this guy asked me, he says, I've got all these bass about this long and they're just not growing. So I bought 100 pounds of fathead minnows and I stocked them in the pond. And I had just got through making a statement that fathead minnows in an existing bass pond don't work well because they get eaten too quick. They can't become established. So I said, okay, you spent about $1,000 on those minnows. He said, yes, I did. And I said, and earlier in this seminar today, I mentioned that it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a bass to gain 1 pound. So you spend $1,000 to gain 10 pounds on your bass. So eat them by candlelight. Everybody started laughing. He said, what's a better way to spend that $1,000? I said, what you need to do is you need to call Texas Hunter Feeders, buy a fish feeder for $700, $750, whichever, depending on the model you pick, and buy $300 worth of fish food. Because that $300 worth of fish food would be about 6 or 7 bags of fish food, which would be 300 to 350 pounds. And you're going to grow your own bait fish, and they convert that feed about 1.2 or 1.3 to 1 to really gain the weight. I see Tim Cook watching. Hello, Tim.
Hey, Bob, just follow up on that just a little bit. Yeah, there's about a 2-to-1 ratio of fish feed when you're using pellets, if you're feeding pellets, as opposed to 10 pounds of forage that you're going to have to feed for them to gain 1 pound. So financially, it's a lot better to step up and use a feeder and use some great pellets.
Way better.
You could tell them all about different types of feed and nutrition, all the benefits of that as well.
A good, high-quality feed. That's right. John Henry got his first Pond Boss magazine yesterday in the mail. Man, he'd been missing a great magazine, he says. That's good. Jim Fritch, howdy. Hello, Jim. Glad you're on. We're going to tackle one of your questions here in a minute. Kevin Briggs says hello. Jim Liner, Chris Blood. Chris Blood, you know him?
Chris Blood. He's a good-looking guy.
Texas Hunter Feeders. So we're glad everybody's on board, and we're going to keep rolling here. One thing I never remember is to turn my speaker off on my laptop. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my laptop, reading the questions as they come, and we're going to be talking more about where we're going here. Jim Liner from Alabama, Ray Scott. Mark Finn, I love my Texas Hunter fish feeder. Mark Finn is Zep on the Pond Boss Forum. So one of the resources that you've got, if you want to learn more about your pond, is pondboss.com, Ask the Boss. Great forum there. Outstanding forum. A lot of good, helpful information and a lot of good, helpful people. That's a good place to go. So let me take another one of these questions, then we're going to zero in a little bit more on feeding fish.
You know, I kind of like what Mark said, though. I think Mark is a very intelligent person. And I know you're going to be giving away a hat a little bit later, a Pond Boss hat.
Yes, I am.
Somebody.
Yeah.
Well, I want to send Mark a hat because he's made a great comment.
Uh-oh.
He's obviously very, very astute.
Hey, Zeb.
So Mark, if you could send me to my email, just Dale@TexasHunter.com, I'll send you a hat.
Whoa.
Appreciate you.
Dude, how cool is that? Yes, sir. Todd Austin's on board. Hello, Todd. Let's see. You know what? Speaking of hats, each week we do a drawing, and here's what I want you guys to do. Each week we do a drawing, and the people that are entered in the drawing do this. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments, like the video, and share this video with your friends. So we want to try to keep building an audience. So if you do those 3 things, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section, right here where you're looking at it, click like on the video and share the video. Then you're going to be in line up to bat for a Pond Boss hat and a coffee mug, which I didn't bring one of those to San Antonio. Just play like, here it is right there.
It's good looking.
And plus, you know what? We've got some other things. We've got this little brochure here that we put together. This Designing a Feeding Program. It tells you all about the different ways to feed fish, all the different species, all that kind of thing. We'll send you one of those as well. That'd be kind of cool. Troy Todd, you did it. Maceo coming in from Georgia. Glad to see Maceo. So let's talk a little bit about feeding fish. If somebody calls into Texas Hunter, Dale, and they say, hey, I've got about a 2-acre pond and I want to feed the fish, what do you tell them?
Well, we kind of go back to what you talk about, Bob, which what are their goals? We ask them a couple questions about what type of fish they have, what kind of population, what's the density like of the fish, a little bit about the temperature, where they're at, and those types of things. Typically, they'll use 1 fish feeder for every, you can go up to 4 to 5 acres potentially with 1 feeder. And on average, people feed about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a day. Most people, what they do is they'll feed twice a day, and they'll feed about 6-7 seconds each feeding. And the big thing about feeding is once you start, you want to be real consistent about where you're feeding, the times you feed, and go from there.
Okay, so, and you basically want to feed the fish to where they eat it. If they clean it up within about 10 seconds, you can feed them a little bit more. If they don't clean it up within about 5 minutes, you're feeding too much. And I tell you this, fish tend to eat about 3% of their body weight every day once the water temperature gets up into the 70s. Now, the prime operating temperatures for fish to be fed are going to be when the temperature's in the low 60s all the way up into the low 80s, 82, 83. Higher than that, lower than that, feeding activity slows way, way, way down.
Definitely. When it gets colder, they don't move around as much. So you can back off on the feeding just a little bit because it takes a lot of energy for the fish to move around. So they're going to stay close to the feeder.
Yes, they do that. And but I tell you what, I have seen them, at Kingfisher, Richmond Mill Lake in North Carolina. We've been feeding fish there since 2005. And there are some areas where we just can't put a feeder. And I've noticed that there's been times when we were feeding feed-trained largemouth bass, for example, and you'd see the feeders go off, and boy, less than 45 minutes later, a quarter of a mile away, we'd catch a bass that would be spitting up Aquamax largemouth pellets. Another thing that's important is the kind of feed that you choose. In today's world, things are a lot different than it was 35 years ago. 35 years ago, if you wanted to feed fish, you'd just go to the Purina store and you'd go buy fish chow and you just go feed it. Nowadays, you can have a feeding program, and you can feed small fish if you want. There's feeds out there that will have multiple sizes. Matter of fact, MVP is one of the latest outstanding products that Purina Mills has produced. So you can choose the kinds of feed and feed in areas of the lake that are most conducive to feed the fish that you target. Here's what I mean by that. You can feed small fish in fairly shallow water, or you can feed a little bit bigger fish over deeper water. Now, if you start feeding small fish over deeper water, they're going to get ambushed. Now, keep in mind that largemouth bass don't eat fish food unless you buy them feed trained from a hatchery. They're conditioned to eat fish food. But bluegill will eat fish food all day long. So will channel catfish, golden shiners, fathead minnows. They will all eat fish food. And the kind of food that you choose should be based on your goals. You don't have to feed a high-priced, heavy fish meal-based fish food if you want to grow big catfish. They digest grain, where the carnivores don't. Look at a channel cat, kind of like a teenager. If they're hungry, they're going to go find something in the refrigerator. They'd rather have meat, but if it's not there, they'll eat vegetables if they have to. Just might put a little cheese on the broccoli.
Well, when you mention feeding something and finding something, when you have a fish feeder, it creates a sweet spot also. Mm-hmm. So the fish are going to be hanging around there. And one of the more exciting things, and one of the stories we hear all the time from our customers when they call in, is they're taking their grandkids out to fish, and they want to be able to put that pole out there and catch a fish right away. So it creates a great spot for them to do that, and it works out fantastic for that.
Yes, and that brings up another good point. You can feed fish to grow fish, but you can also feed fish to supplement their food chain. Or you can even feed fish to attract them to where you want them to come. So there's different reasons to do that. So let's go back to that customer calling in and asking about a feeder. How do you know, or how do you kind of get to the point to where you can counsel them on which feeder to buy? I mean, I see feeders in here. There's a protein feeder here that we'll go look at here in a little bit that sells for $289. And then you've got these great big ones that hold 250 pounds of fish food that sell for just under $1,000. So when you're talking to somebody, how do you guide them to where they need to go to buy the right kind of feeder?
Well, in the case of fish feeders, it's pretty easy because it's only going to go one direction. So as opposed to where Bob was mentioning a deer feeder, they're more of a scatter feeder. They throw it out in a circular pattern of 360, where when you're using a fish feeder, it's going to throw it out strictly one direction. What we do differently that our customers tell us they really like is we use two motors on our system. So one motor is a blower motor, and that's revs up right away and starts up, and it's up to full speed in about a second, Bob. Mm-hmm. From there, the top motor releases feed from the hopper. So when the feed is introduced into it, it doesn't dribble feed right on the bank there for you.
Some feeders do that.
It starts out a little bit further. Right. A lot of them do that.
Yep.
So it blows it out. It's going to send it out about 45 feet in kind of a pie-shaped pattern. So where you have dominant or real aggressive fish, you can feed all of them because they can't cover that whole area through there.
Okay,
it
so
gives
now
a wide range.
Okay, so now when you're setting a feeder, you can set it to throw it a maximum distance, but you can also back it off a little bit, can't you?
Well, it throws it out pretty evenly all the way through it. So from about 5 feet out, Bob, it's going to throw it pretty well even all the way through there.
But if you don't want it to throw 45 feet, can you do that? Can you change that? Okay, so that's the way it's set to go.
It's designed to go that way. The other thing that I should mention is is that when you set it up, a lot of people set them up on a bank if you're putting it or on a dock.
Okay.
So you can order different types of legs. If you're setting it on a dock or a pier, you're going to use straight legs.
Okay.
Or when you put it on a bank, you'll have adjustable legs so it can adjust to the terrain.
Got it. Okay, so you can actually buy some for a dock where you can anchor the feeder to the dock and it won't blow off. And then on the shoreline, nobody's shore is level, so you've got legs that you can adjust to make the feeder sit level.
Correct.
Or you can even make it tilt back a little bit if you wanted to have a bigger arch and throw it a little different distance.
You could. You want to try and keep as level as possible. One thing nice about Texas Hunter products is all of our feeders come with, in the case of the banks, it's going to come with a 24-inch stake with 4 of those so you secure it. Lag bolts if they're putting it in, so you don't have to worry about a lot of.
And you supply that stuff, don't you?
Comes with it when we ship it, yes, sir.
So you have lag bolts and stakes and things for the shoreline. That's
Absolutely.
right. Okay. Let's see here. We got a question here for you. Anthony Abate. Anthony, I don't think he's missed one yet either. He's from outside Chicago, Illinois. His question to you is, do you size the feeder to the pond size or to the estimated number of fish?
It's a great question. You know, typically, and we get asked that quite a bit.
Okay.
But again, it really goes back to what the goals are, what you're trying to produce. But typically, you're going to run, again, as far as size, you're going to go about, depending on how big the lake or pond is. Did he indicate the size of that at all?
No, but I'll help you with this a little bit if you want. What we tell people, we're dealers with Bob Lusk Outdoors, my pond management company. We're also dealers of Texas Hunter feeders. And if somebody says to us, we want to have a feeder for a 5-acre pond, then we'll tell them you're going to need 1 feeder, 2 at the most. You know, we counsel depending on the goals. And then he says, which feeder? My question is, how often do you want to fill it? Because if you don't want to fill it but maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks, then buy the bigger feeder, the 250-pound feeder. Now, we don't ever tell people to fill that feeder completely up, because I like that feed, especially in the summertime, to be cycled through within a month, because you don't want, because it's going to sit there and bake every day in the sunshine. So the size of the feeder is basically going to be determined by somewhat how many fish you're feeding and how often you want to go fill the feeder. If you don't mind filling it up every couple of weeks, then get a smaller one.
Yeah, the feeders are the same as far as how they're designed. It's simply a matter of capacity. Also, if you live far away and you're not up there as often, you want to get something that gives you a little bit more capacity. Again, we talked a little bit earlier about how important it is to be consistent. Well, once you start feeding, you want to be consistent with it, so you don't want to run out.
That's right.
So depending on where you live, the access to it, and again, you're going to feed on average a couple pounds a day per feeder.
Todd Watts joined in. Todd has got a lake up in Ohio. He lives in Hurricane, West Virginia. Greetings, Todd. And he's got several Texas Hunter feeders, and he's got a whole different program. I'll just talk about him just for a minute. Todd's pretty aggressive. He likes aggressive, meaning he wants to grow big fish as fast as he can. So not only is he supplementing nature, he also wants high catch rates. So he's overstocked his fish a little bit. So those fish deserve more feed, and they need more feed to grow at the rates that he wants. So he's got 2 or 3, I think it's 3 different size classes of feed-trained largemouth bass, as well as bluegill, and he wants to grow some bluegill and knock on the door at 2 pounds. So his feeding program is pretty much based on his goals, and his pond is slightly overstocked. And at some point, he'll start culling some of those fish that are the underperformers. But in the meantime, he's pretty aggressive with his feeding. I don't think he's real aggressive right now because it's cold up there. You know, so where we're going with you guys is your goals are a key determining factor on which feeder you want to buy and which feeds you want to use. So keep that in mind as you get ready to start thinking about feeding fish. Do you want to feed them to grow? Feeding expedites growth rates. It speeds up how they grow. You can supplement what nature offers, or you can just use it as a fish attractant. So you got to figure out which one of those you want to do. Then you got to zero in on what fish you're feeding or wanting to feed, and then you can choose which feeder and then which feeds that you want to use.
Sure, and if a lot of people think you can just throw a whole lot of bass in there. And the more bass you throw in there, the better it is. But bass are going to eat the forage. They're going to eat the feed. But if you have too many in there and you're not weaning them out, eventually they're going to get to a point where there's nothing for them to eat. They're going to get smaller and smaller.
Yep, and
not be near as healthy as what they should be.
Yes, and you know, feeding fish, it's not unlike having a garden. you're only going to put out so much fertilizer, and then you have enough. At some point, you got to be taking and harvesting some of the bounty. Now, you get to decide what that bounty is. We got a question here I'll get to in a minute that helps explain that. Jack Walker III says, thoughts on stocking crawfish for supplemental feeding in a pond that was stocked last summer with largemouth bass and bluegill a year ago. Also been running Texas hunter feeders every day. All right, why don't we hit that one? You want to tackle that one? Or you want me to hit it? Hey, Steve Lewis, I see you're on board, buddy. Glad to see you. Here's the way I see crawfish. Crawfish are a stopgap animal to get you between seasons as you're feeding the fish. So crawfish are available mostly in the springtime, and depending on where you are, up until the early part of the summer. They're affordable. And look at them as a kind of as a snack or something to supplement what nature's providing for your pond. I don't look at those as a go-to animal to feed fish. And the thing about feeding bass with them, your bass need to be, if you're going to go buy crawfish, your bass need to be at least 12 inches long. So I see that you stocked largemouth bass a summer ago. I don't know that just feeding crawfish is going to help you much. I don't know your bass are big enough. If you stock fingerlings, they're not going to be big enough yet. But what you could do is cut the numbers back to see if you can establish crawfish in that pond, if you'd like to do that. Let's see, Kevin Briggs. Guess what? He says, I love my Texas hunter feeder. The only good problem these guys is it throws the feed too far. So, hey, Kevin, I bet you heard that he offered a hat. Dale at Texas Hunter Feeders.
He deserves one. He deserves one.
All right.
What you might want to do, though, is cut your time down just a little bit. I'm not sure how many seconds you're actually throwing it, but you can cut your time down just a little bit and run it a little bit, maybe a few more times, another time or two a day.
Now,
cut the time down just a little bit.
That's a good idea. And another thing you can do to keep it from throwing so far is tilt the angle. So if you want to raise the feeder up to where it doesn't have that trajectory that it has now, if you change the trajectory, you're going to change the distance. So you can do it that way. Let's see, looks like Michael Eric's on board up there from Iowa. Let's see, Willie Howell, my next door neighbor, building a house. I heard your pond's almost full. I bet it's full by now. We might need to put some fish in that before long. Jason Nipstad says, perfect opportunity to get slow motion video of bass attacking brim when the feeder goes off. Well, you know what? If you'll shoot that video and send it to us, we'll figure out how to use it because people love to see that. Dick Tabert's on board. Kevin Briggs just chimed back in. He says it definitely throws it. Stephen Barden, one of our dear friends, Texas Pro Lake Management, and a good customer at Texas Hunter Feeders. Stephen Barden's on board. Glad to see him. TJ Graney from Austin, Texas. I use Texas Hunter Feeders. Yes, he does. Smart. TJ has got something pretty cool. He built just a small pond in his front yard. And I think if you stand on his roof, you can see downtown Austin from his house. And it's almost like a reflection pond. But since he loves to fish, how can you not have fish in that pond? He does, and he feeds them faithfully. Let's see, Kevin Briggs says, okay, leaned it down already, thanks. There you go, see, you knew the answer before you asked the question. That's super duper. I'm going to circle back on some of these questions. Good gosh, it's already 6:53. We're rocking here. Let's see here. Jim Fritch, sedimentation control. Will gypsum or any of the chemicals take care of Texas clay running into lakes and tanks? No. Here's what will take care of clay running into lakes. Vegetate it. Anywhere where you've got disturbed dirt, get grass growing on it. Now, once that clay moves into the water, then you can do something about it. Now, what we have done is we've piled gypsum up in the watershed like in a creek bed where we know we're going to have to deal with muddy water for a while. We'll just buy a dump truck load of gypsum, softball to baseball-sized rocks, put them in the creek itself, and then water percolates through that gypsum and dissolves it and sucks out some of that clay. Or if it doesn't, it mixes enough gypsum to allow it to settle out in the pond. But get that dirt vegetated as soon as you can. Let's see, Brent Rutan asked, how about talking about how to get in front of pond vegetation growth before the spring growth period? Are there treatments that we could or should do sooner than later that would help control levels of filamentous algae during late spring and summer? Yes, there are. one of the things you got to understand is when you have the plants, you're dealing with a symptom of the problem. Here's the real problem. The problem is the temperature is exactly like it needs to be for them to grow, those plants to grow. You got to have food to feed them, and you got to have sunlight. When those three things come together, plants are going to grow. The easiest one to manage is sunlight penetration. So that's why we tell people when they're getting ready to build a pond and design it, we want to get down to 3 feet deep as soon as we can, 3-to-1 slope to get that water deep. Now, if you don't have that this time of year, now this is February 21, I'm going to tell you this, if you want to put a little bit of pond dye in to minimize UV light penetration into the water, you can do that. But do it to where that dye is gone by the time the water temperature goes up. It will dilute and fade away after about 6 or 8 weeks. So using some dye to help put off the growth of algae could be a smart thing, but you don't want it there when your food chain starts to kick in. Let's see here. TJ Graney, I use Texas Hunter Fisheries. We talked about that. Hey, send an email to Dale, Texas Hunter. You open the can of worms. Hat coming. All right, now, Dick Tabbert, what's a cure?
Tilapia help with that too?
You know what? Tilapia can, but see, tilapia won't let you get ahead of it. The question he asked was, will tilapia help with algae? Yes, they will. They'll eat it, but they won't prevent it. And tilapia, we can only use those when the water temperature is above about 60, or they're not going to be real active. They die at 52. And algae starts growing in some ponds around 45 degrees or 48 degrees. So there's this window from now until about the middle part of April, in Texas anyway, to where tilapia aren't going to be of any help, but the pond dye could be of help. Now, I'm not telling people to run out and put pond dye out there. I'm just telling you that's one option you've got. Once the water temperature hits about 55 to 58 going up, then you can look at fertilization if you're in a part of the country where that's an acceptable practice and your water's gin clear. So now let's see, Dick Tabbert, what's a cure to help rid the pond from some of the muck? Well, one thing you want to do is try to prevent the muck from coming in, but you're still going to get muck from organic matter, leaves, grass clippings, fish waste, all that. One of the ways to process that muck and that organic matter is with aeration and microbes. And we'll tackle the aeration subject one of these days before long. That's a real hot topic that we'll want to talk about. Willie Howe, the neighbor, how soon after you build a pond can you stock it? Now. Now that you've got water. Now, and here's Willie's case. Willie needed some dirt to build a house pad. So he's sitting in just a perfect spot to where he could build a little teardrop-shaped pond that's probably, I'm going to say maybe 50 or 75 feet across, maybe 80 feet long. And it's 6 or 7 feet deep when it's full. So job one, and there is a little dam there. So we're pretty confident, since I got to help watch what happened there and have a little bit of input in it, I'm pretty confident that your dam is going to hold water. But job one, that soil, with as much rain as you're getting right now, that soil is going to wick and absorb as much moisture as it can. So I'd give that pond 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll be there with you and look at it with you, before you put any fish in it. We want to be sure it doesn't seep, doesn't leak. And once we know that, all's fair. Now, it's better to do it when the water's a little bit warmer, but there's nothing saying you can't do that. Let's see, let's tackle one of these questions here. Pete Gauger says, there's a pond where I work that has lots of stunted bass and lots of fairly good-sized sunfish. So, should we harvest the little bass to decrease the population? Also, what about forage for them? You want to tackle that?
Well, again, anytime you let the bass population get too large, you definitely want to harvest them. Or, again, what's going to happen, they're going to eat all the forage, or you got to put a ton of forage in there, or a lot more feed in there.
Yes.
Pellets in there. But without knowing the size of them, it would be a little bit tougher. But if you don't harvest them, though, sooner or later they're going to get smaller and smaller, and you're just going to really cause a lot of damage in the long run.
That's exactly right. Now I'm going to come at you from a little bit different angle on that question. When I hear that you have a lot of stunted bass and fairly good-sized sunfish, that suggests to me that it's been that way for a while. For every day that a bass, or any fish for that matter, loses a meal, it can't make it up. So if that pond has been that way for several years, the first thing you need to do is start culling some of those bass. And any bass, I'd say 14 inches or smaller, start taking it out. Now, that's to thin their numbers, but that's not the answer to this question, to this dilemma. Also, I'd consider feeding those bluegill, because if you can feed the bluegill, get their nutrition up, then they can have more babies. If they can have more babies, then now you're building the food chain at the same time that you're reducing the number of mouths. You're going to have to take out quite a few of those little bass. It doesn't say how big the pond is, but when you start culling those bass, the younger bass are going to be the ones that will begin to grow faster. So you may not see any difference for 18 months, but after 18 months to 2 years of culling bass, then you'll start to see some difference in growth rates and things. Billy, let's see here. Billy Elmore asked, what types of insect control around ponds? We all have fire ants. Some have moles, and there are plenty of others to get rid of. Always worry about what gets into the pond and any effect. Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you there is if you have pests and you choose to eradicate them, be real picky how you choose to do that around water. First thing I would do is spend a little time online looking at the products that are available and look at the labels. Read the labels. If you'll read the labels, then you'll be able to make smarter decisions on what to do. You know, I remember when I was a kid, my parents bought a place.
That was a long time ago, though, wasn't it?
Well, it kind of was. Rim shot. Yeah, it was in the 60s. How old are you?
I remember them. Those were good days.
My dad used to sit for hours at a time with a 22 over a gopher hole, waiting for that gopher to come out of that hole. And boy, every once in a while, about once every blue moon, we'd hear a pow, and there it goes. He'd get a gopher. But there's better ways now. There's gopher traps that you can bait. You know, the fire ants, there's all kinds of things now. There's some products out there that put some enzymes into the colony that when the queen eats it, she's sterilized. So there's some products that you can find. And yes, you do need to be picky about what's going to flow into your pond. All right, Holly Stoskus asked this question the other day. Why do pond builders live at the poverty level and don't database and market customers using new software? That's the value of their company. You want to tackle that, or you want me to hit it?
No, it's all about you guys.
Okay, well, I'll take that deflection. I'll tell you this. Everybody's got and this is a business question, and I did a little research on Holly. Holly builds backyard water gardens. And apparently that's a pretty competitive business. But I know this, the people that I work with, once I finally built a good client base, it took a long, long time to be profitable. But I looked at it as I was chasing my passion. So I've never worked. I'm chasing a passion. And I get paid for my hobby. And it's really, really fun. It took a while to find the niche. And then it also took a little bit of time to figure out how to handle the business side of things. And if you don't handle all those things, you probably are going to be near the poverty level. But what you got to do is figure out that people that are spending money with you, they made a profit in order to be able to get where they are, to be able to afford what you're getting ready to do. So don't be afraid to make a profit. I think that's a good thing. People want value for what they're spending their money for, and it could be that you're just asking not enough money or not managing it properly. So I'm going to leave that there.
Hey, Bob, I want to add to it. You know, one of the things we did a couple of years ago, we did some surveys with people, and we asked landowners, and we asked with people like yourself, lake and pond managers across country, a lot of different questions, trying to find out if there were some commonalities between what they were looking for in ponds and what their go-to was. But one of the things that came out of it that really ties in here was the value that you create. So a lake and pond management person, one of the things they came back, they told us a couple things. Number one, they told us that it made their experience so much better. It was a lot more fun to go through this. The other thing they told us was it saved them a lot of money, because there were a lot of mistakes that they would have made. Like I say, dumping in a bunch of bass, or doing different things, or the right type of food, right type of feed to make sure you get the protein levels that you need. But the other thing that they said was it increased the value of my property. And when you're a landowner and you increase the value of it, that's a lot of value that you're creating. So don't cut yourself short. You're doing a big value for the customer. And we view lake and pond management like an attorney or an accountant, somebody that's a professional out there every day working. So absolutely don't cut yourself short. You make a mistake if you do.
That's right. Good. Let's see here. I'm going to look back down here on our Facebook feed here. Nathan Grigsby, what kind of aquatic vegetation would you recommend planting for newly built ponds that would benefit bass, catfish, and bluegill? Nathan, here's my answer to that. Don't plant anything. Because if you've got all the ingredients, if you've got just enough fertility in the soil, you've got the right temperature, and you have sunlight, something's gonna grow. It's amazing to me sometimes how a brand new pond that sits in an area that you wouldn't think would have plants, they pop up within just a few months. So let nature do what nature does first. Now, if you're not getting plant growth, then you start asking some questions about which plants. But let me give you a direct answer to your question. If you want to plant some aquatic vegetation, pick something that's native. Now, I'm not quite sure where you are. I'll look later, but maybe you can tell me. Look at some of the things that are native, like American pondweed, or some of the other pondweeds, sago pondweed. Look at eelgrass. Eelgrass is outstanding. So if you want to plant some plants, do that, but do some homework first to be sure you know what's native and non-invasive. There's some native plants out there that are invasive. You don't want that. So let's tackle another question here. We only got a couple more of these questions, and then I want to zero in totally on feeding fish and feeding programs and all that. Remember, Pond Boss Magazine, I know we got some new viewers up there. Pond Boss Magazine comes out every other month. It's $35 a year. It's well worth it. And if you will put hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, click like on this video, and share it with your friends, then you'll be up for a drawing for a hat and a Pond Boss coffee mug. Now, guess who won last week? Bryant Brundrett won last week, so he'll be getting a hat and a coffee mug in the mail, along with one of these pretty cool little things here about how to feed fish. I know he'd like to have that. Some of you guys might as well. If you want one of these designing a feeding program for your fish that Pond Boss put out with Texas Hunter and with Purina, then just let me know. Send an email to info@pondboss.com. And if you want a sample copy of the magazine, we'll do that as well. So just send that to info@pondboss.com or call the office, 800-687-6075. 800-687-6075. One more question. Daniel Powell, who is just eaten up with this broadcast. He's such an ardent, fervent, young pond manager. He's just getting his legs under him over there in North Carolina. You're going to be hearing from him before long.
I'm looking forward to it.
He says, I was wondering if you could share info on how you survey a pond for adequate structure for all the fish types and size classes. If you have time, covering the types and best locations of cover for the different fish and different size classes of each fish would be helpful. I'm going to hit that, just summarize that just like this. When we professionally go out and analyze a lake, looking specifically for habitat like that, we use side scan sonar to go and identify everything we can find on the lake bottom, especially stuff that's 12 feet deep or shallower. Now, most ponds, you want to design the majority of your fish habitat in water that's 5 feet to 7 feet deep with some spawning beds shallower. So when you look at the different sizes of the different species of fish, the kind of cover they need, little bitty fish need dense cover. That's why I love aquatic plants around the perimeter of a pond in certain areas, in coves, things like that. Because if you can protect those little bitty bait fish for 40 days, 30 days, 50 days, something like that, their value goes up tremendously as a source of food. So the size of the fish is, in the species of the fish, you want dense cover for little bitty fish. You want more fluffy cover for bigger fish. I think that's a good description. And for like your bigger fish, enhance points with shallow water, quick access to deep water with things like logs, rock piles are good. So we look to see what's there, and then we try to enhance it beyond that. One more question. This is a little bit more technical, but I can handle this pretty quick so we can get back to feeding fish. Under what circumstances do this comes from Dave Glover. If I recall, I think Dave is in North Carolina. Golly, got a lot of Carolinas out there. And under what circumstances do minimum link limits work versus slot limits? How should we approach harvesting the minimum amount of our pond, out of our ponds, to maintain maximum production? That's a great question, very thoughtful question. Here's your answer. Minimum length limits work best on ponds that you want to maintain a balance, and you're trying not necessarily to grow the biggest fish you can get, but you want to have a balanced fishery. So when you're asking, you know, like a slot limit, that's when you're trying to protect the biggest fish. With a minimum length limit, you want them to grow up to a certain length and then harvest them beyond that. Well, that's your call. If that's your goals, you by all means do that. And this says, let's see, the other question was, how should we approach harvesting the minimum amount out of our ponds to maintain maximum production? Well, what you do there is you weigh and measure every fish you catch and then compare that to standard. So as long as whatever fish you're targeting, whether it's bluegill or bass or catfish, you weigh and measure those fish, and pretty soon you're going to see that they're beginning to lose a little bit of weight. Well, as long as they're gaining weight or they're at or above what their standard weight should be, and we've talked about this in other broadcasts, as long as they're at or above standard weight, then you're still maximizing production. Now, you know, if somebody were to ask me what's maximum production, I don't know. It depends on that pond, its food chain, its habitat, the community underwater, the kinds of fish that you've got in there. So, but to answer that question is measure and weigh all the fish that you take out, and even the ones you throw back. As long as they're chunky and healthy, then you're doing good. Now, here's the problem with the minimum length limit. You're going to get to some point, say your minimum length limit's 14 inches. You're going to get to a point where if you're harvesting fish above that size, that you're going to start catching a whole bunch of fish that are 13 3/4 inches. Now, if those fish are losing weight, then you need to change your minimum length limit. And that's how that works. All right, Dale, I think we've handled all these questions that came in. Let's see what's coming in online here.
Let's see it.
All right, let's see. Lance Farber, thanks for the hat and the mug. You got it, didn't you? You one of the winners, brother. That's good. All right, Dale, let's talk about feeding fish a little bit more. When somebody says, you know, I've been looking at a feeding program, and I haven't stocked my fish yet, and I'm talking about stocking bluegills and catfish and bass. Do you counsel with them a little differently than somebody that just has an existing pond with bass and bluegill? What do you tell them?
Well, we really try and ask a lot of questions to find out, really, again, going back to what their goals are. We ask them if they're working with a lake management professional, and if not, we really counsel them to try and do that. As far as the order that they're doing, you know, depending on the time of year, it's going to change things. But bluegill, you mentioned that, it's something you keep hearing more and more. That's really, that's the backbone of everything that happens in the food chain. So number one is get the bluegill going before you introduce other fish into it, for the most part. So you're going to be feeding and getting the bluegill going. They also reproduce much quicker when you're doing a feeding program. But depending on what other fish you're trying to put in there, what striped bass or whatever you're trying to put in there, you've got a lot of different options that are available to you. But we try and ask as many questions, really depending on what their goals are.
So when you call into Texas Hunter Feeder and get ready to order a feeder, then they're going to grill you to find out what your goals are, what you're planning on doing, what kind of fish you're going to feed, you know, how fast you want them to grow, how big is your pond.
How often they're getting out to their pond.
Yep, that's right. Are you going to be out there once a month? You're going to be out there 3 times a month. So there's a number of questions that they're going to ask you. Then they're going to help try to guide you into the right product. And I have to tell you, I've been working with Texas Hunter now, you know, as a dealer for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years probably.
Longer than that. Sure.
Longer than that? Yeah. Well, how old am I? And I tell you, one thing I love about you guys is I can call you at 1 o'clock. I can receive a phone call or a confirmation of an order at 1 o'clock, and I can call here and place that order, and when does it ship?
Well, we try and ship them out within 24 hours or less.
Okay.
But number one, you're going to get a live person that's going to answer the phone.
Yes.
Number one. But I think, you know, when you talk about our feeders, just real quickly, it's so important that they be reliable and that they're dependable. And that's really one thing that we build into every one of ours. They're quality control tested 5 times as they go down through the line, built right here in the United States. In fact, these are built, Bob, right across the street from us here.
So their factory right here where they manufacture all their feeders. And, you know, do they cost more than what? Are they cheap? No, they're not. I'll tell you this, my opinion is the value of these Texas Hunter feeders is far better than the feeders you're going to go buy in a box store. And of course, you're going to get what you paid for. And one thing I love about Texas Hunter feeders is they're, like Dale said, they're dependable, you know, and their customer service is outstanding. I can't think of the last time we had a problem with one, but I know we've had cases where a pond got flooded and the feeder was submerged. And you guys told the customer how to troubleshoot it and then sent them replacement parts out that day. You know, so the customer service is outstanding and the feeders are outstanding as well.
Well, we're real fortunate. We've got great customers too, which really helps. But you talk about different testimonials that you get. We had a testimonial that came in a couple of years ago from a gentleman that's a chef over in Baton Rouge when they had the big floods that were going on there. And he sent us a note and he said that, and he ended up sending some pictures as well. And he said, you know, my feeder's been under 6 feet underwater for about 5 days now. And what do I do? You know, so he let everything dry out, he cleaned it out, and he started up and he ordered another timer.
That was it?
And he ordered a timer. And he said, you know what, I never used the timer because when we put it all together, everything worked.
What?
And he said, and I forget his quote, he said he didn't know if it was a miracle or if it was just great quality. He said, I think I'm going to go with great quality. But anyway,
good.
we don't guarantee that on everyone, but it really is. The quality and reliability is so important when you build something today.
Absolutely, and you can sure count on that with you guys.
Absolutely.
Here's a question I missed a while ago. Kevin Briggs asked, can you take out too many bass under 14 inches long? Probably not. You know, I'll never forget the first time I met Ray Scott, the founder of BASS. He was at I had a booth at a fishing show in Dallas, outside of Dallas, and Ray Scott flew in with Earl Benz with Triton Boats back then, and you know, to promote boats and things, and they were only going to be there a few hours, but Ray had just published a book called Bass Boss. So I wanted that, and I wanted to meet him. I'd never met him. This was probably 20 years ago or so, and so I went up to his table, stood in line, and it was my turn, and the book cost $20, so I had a $20 bill in my hand. And he said, he looked up, had his cowboy hat on, he looked up, he said, you want one of my books? I said, yes, sir, I do. He says, that'll be $20. So I handed him that $20 bill. He said, you want me to sign it for you? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, what's your name? I said, I'm Bob Lusk. He said, the pond boss? I just about melted right there. I thought, oh my gosh,
good day.
This guy's an icon and he knows who I am. And I said, well, yeah, I'm the pond boss. And he says, well, by gosh, it's just so nice to meet you. And we shook hands and chit-chatted for a minute, and there was a pretty long line. He says, come around here and sit down by me. He said, wait a minute, don't you have a book out? And I said, yes, sir, I do. I've got a book that just out called Raising Trophy Bass. He says, you got him with you? I said, yes, sir. He says, how much are they? I said, $20. So I got my $20 back, went and got him a book, signed his, and he signed mine, and we sat down and chatted. And I'll never forget what he said. He says, because I was dying. He's the guy that brought catch and release into the bass fishing world. So I said, you know, Ray, do you really believe in catch and release? He said, oh yeah, on these public lakes. He said that are high pressure lakes. You have to have that. Now my lake, the President's Lake over here in Alabama, he says, what I tell people is I want them to take out every bass 14 inches and under. And when I think they've taken out enough, I double it and make them take that many more. So here's the answer to your, and I knew at that point he and I were going to be friends. So at that point, here's what I'm going to tell you. The lake won't let you take out too many 14-inch bass. Now, if you get to the point where you catch a 14, and you've taken out a bunch of 14-inch bass, and you catch some that Ray Scott says looks like an Alabama deputy sheriff, throw it back. Because what will happen is the younger fish are going to grow on up and fill that slot. So all those fish that are 8 or 9 inches this spring, they're going to be 14 inches next fall. All right, let's see here.
You know, when you talk about different people with stories and
Yes.
stuff, you know, one of the greatest storytellers was Fred Bear.
Oh, yeah,
Lots of
yeah.
books, great TV show. But one thing that he said that I liked, he said, a hunt based on trophies taken falls far, if you base it only on trophies that falls far short of the ultimate goal of what it should be. I think we forget sometimes what's really important, what you're really out there for. It isn't just getting the great big trophies.
That's right.
It's getting everything else, the experience that goes along with it.
I'll tell you what, anytime we're in the electrofishing boat and we shock up a double-digit bass, I still feel the hair on my neck stand up. You know, I feel a little tingle go down my spine. I know my eyes bug out. And this is my 39th year doing this because those fish are so rare and so quality, you know. But and it all revolves right back to the best habitat an outstanding food chain, the good genetics, and then a good harvest program. So I'm going to take another question here, and then we're going to, looks like, hey, Fred Bingaman checking in from Brownstown, Illinois. Hey, Fred, I guess are you guys back from Maui? I've been kind of lurking, watching what you're up to on Facebook. Let's see here. Lance Faber says, I have cormorants on the pond. Are they culling my bass for me? Yes, they are. The problem is depending on how many cormorants you have, they can decimate the entire population of fish. So I've actually seen ponds and lakes that I think cormorants helped. But you need to be the one that chooses how many they let you take, or you let them take. So pay attention to those. Let's talk some more about feeding fish. You get this little free brochure here that's the different kinds of fish. We've got carnivorous species of fish, which bluegill fit that category, believe it or not. They're carnivores. There's hybrid sunfish, feed train largemouth bass, they'll
Trout.
Yep, rainbow trout, hybrid stripers, grass carp. Even threadfin shad will eat fish food.
Well, there's feed train bass, food train.
Bass
that's
feed train largemouth bass. So there's a number of fish. So let's talk about the economy of feeding fish. I touched on it a little earlier with the guy that spent $1,000 on minnows. But if the high-end feeds, the fish meal-based fish foods, especially those like Purina produces, their Aquamax largemouth, Aquamax 500, 600, and MVP products. Those are different products for different situations, different circumstances. Those are really high-end fish foods, $42 to $47 for a 50-pound bag. So you want to be picky about how you use that. The grain-based fish foods, on the other hand, those are going to be a lot less expensive. They could be anywhere from $18 to $25, $26, $27 a bag, something like that. When should people feed the different kinds of feed based on what your experience is with fish feeding?
Well, again, it all starts back with the bluegill, with the forage that you're using. And if you're trying to save money, feed the bluegill, feed the forage, and let the fish go to that. The bass are going to go to it, and especially if they're not a bass, a feed trained bass, that's come from a fisheries or something. So concentrate on that, and I think you can certainly keep your costs down. But again, when you talk about efficiencies, when you look at that, it's a 2-to-1 ratio that we talked about a little bit earlier, versus a 10-to-1 ratio if they're eating forage and other fish to try and to gain that 1 pound. 2-to-1 is certainly much more applicable. It saves a lot of money.
And here's the way to really look at that. When it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a bass to gain a pound, for example, if you were to take that 10 pounds of bait fish in a bag and wring all the water out, you'd have 8 pounds of water and 2 pounds of goodies, basically. So this dry fish food converts as well or better than the bait fish with a lot less energy spent to go capture it. The grain-based fish foods, they don't convert nearly as well. Those will be 2-to-1, 2.5-to-1, something like so. In other words, 2 pounds of feed grows a pound of fish. Right. But the fish meal-based fish foods convert it much, much better than that. So if you're going to pay $45 a bag, and the fish are, so that's about 90 cents a pound. Yep. For a 50-pound bag, so you're going to pay 90 cents a pound for that fish food. Then you're going to be spending probably $1.20 per pound of gain, something like that. And compare that to $10 a pound to buy Fathead Minnows, or even $25 or $30 a pound to buy bluegill, depending on the size that you buy. So feeding is real efficient.
It is, but you're also picking up a little bit more in the nutrition and proteins on the other ones as well.
That's right. Quality fish food, quality feeders. Rusty Parker got a question here. A local lake had vegetation but lost it. How do I help bring it back? No grass, no bass. Well, now that's not totally true. No grass means no bass congregate there to eat something. Now, to answer your question, so those things are no. I don't like a lake that doesn't have aquatic plants. I think aquatic plants are crucial to the success of a lake. And I think that's the case because that's outstanding habitat for young of the year fish to escape. Now, too much is a problem. Now, how do you reestablish it? First of all, you got to find out why it's gone. If it's gone because they treated it with herbicides, it's going to come back. If it's gone because grass carp ate it, the chances of you bringing it back are going to be pretty low because you'd have to build an exclusion fence to keep the grass carp from eating it. So question one that you need to answer is, where did it go? Did it go away because of a drought? If it did, and the lake filled back up, it's going to grow again. So answer that question, then you can figure out how to bring it back. You know, we got about 5 minutes left. Dale, do you have any points that you want to make, any topics you want to hit? If not, we'll take a few minutes and walk around the showroom.
I think what we talked about, and we talked about different capacities, different size of feeders. Let's look at some different feeders real quick. And
okay, all right.
See if we can answer any
Let's
of your
go for
questions.
a walk. We're going to go walk around the showroom here and let people see what all there is available here at Texas Hunter. All right, so now.
So let's start with the fish feeders. So we have three different capacities. We have a 70-pound capacity of fish feed. This here particular one's a 250-pound, and then we have a 300-pound. So again, depending on how often you want to get there, how close you are to the product, dictate really which one you need. As far as how they operate, though, they operate really all the same way. So I'm going to pull off this removable side panel that all of ours come with to kind of give you an idea. So I mentioned our systems use a two-motor system. And by the way, you can see this is a clear plexi through here. And all of them come that way. So if you ever pour some feed in there and there's some string that gets caught in there, you never have to worry. You'll be able to see everything at all times. So your bottom motor is going to start right up. Then once this starts, the top motor is going to release feed from the hopper area here. All the hoppers up here are safe. One thing about Texas Hunter, you never ever have to worry about raccoons or varmints getting up in there. They're 100% secure as far as that goes. So
How much does this feeder cost?
this particular feeder here is $6.99.
Okay, $6.99. And that holds, what'd you say?
This holds 70 pounds of fish food.
You know, one of the cool things about holding 70 pounds of fish food is you don't have to wait for it to go completely empty before you can put a 50-pound sack of feed in it. You're not walking away with a partial bag of fish food. You can fill it up.
You want to pour it, keep it full so that you go to the next time it goes.
Okay.
The other thing nice about this is just how simple it is to operate. So our timer, which comes with a 5-year warranty on it, you can see it's very simple. There's only 3 buttons on it. So I'm just going to scroll through here, but it tells you if your battery is good, fair, or poor. It tells you the time of day. Then you have extra 9 different feed settings that you can use to set it during the time. Typically for fish, you're going to feed anywhere from 1 to 3, even 4 times a day as far as that goes. We do run a test run cycle at every time, at the end of the cycle as well. To run tests, you just select it, simple to operate. From select, you can see the seconds are blinking. I'll just go 3 seconds here, and then I'm going to hit menu. It's going to tell you have 10 seconds to move away because it's going to start projecting the feed out. So what happens is you can see here there's only about 5 seconds, 4 seconds. When you come over here, you'll see that this bottom motor just started up. And now your top one just started, and that's going. So once the top one stops and it ran for the 3 seconds that I programmed it, the bottom one's going to continue blowing for another 10 seconds. So everything's totally cleared out of here each time that you operate it. All these are galvanized, Bob. You never have to worry about rusting. It's going to look like this 10 years from now.
All right. What else we got here?
So, for example, you had mentioned different types of feeders that are available. Protein feeders have become extremely popular as well. Similar type situation. They help antler growth. They help as far as the health of them. All of ours are roto-molded. Just like you have with your Yeti cooler, it's roto-molded, it's virtually indestructible. All of them are designed so that it's all one-piece construction. You're going to get true flow all the way through it. Each ones are designed so that they don't get near as hot. There's a lot of metal ones out there. The metal protein feeders get 150 degrees depending on where you're at.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
So here it keeps it much cooler. It also is going to flow to each of the ports that you have.
Okay.
Each port is adjustable. They also make scatter feeders. So you can see there's a pattern here on the ground. The pattern shows you that it's going to throw it about 30 feet wide, and it's going to throw it in a circular pattern. Again, just like on fish feeders, they come in different capacities. You have a 300-pound, and then you have a 650-pound.
Then over here you've got one that you got up on a winch that you can...
We've got a winch system that goes up 14 feet. It's a 300-pound capacity. It's interesting, what we've seen a big shift in the dynamics of feeders. Initially, all of them were scatter feeders. Then what happened was a lot of people went to this type of system here, where they're a tripod system, lift them up, get them away from the animals. And now what's happening is it's evolving over to what they call directional feeders for wildlife. And a directional feeder for wildlife can come in a 300, a 400, or a 500 pound capacity. Again, the big advantage is it's very easy to fill. You could just stand here and fill it. So it's easy to fill. You never ever have to worry about varmints or getting in through here. It's going to throw corn out about 50 feet in a pattern you can see similar to the pattern here we actually put on the floor here. So it throws out in a pattern. This is becoming a very, very popular, and we're selling these all over the country. Everything that we produce, we can ship anywhere in the country to you.
Okay. You got a bigger feeder here, and then what's this hanging up on the wall?
This is a hanging feeder, Bob, and people are using these for a number of different applications. So a hanging feeder, obviously you can see there's a hanging bracket on the top. This is a scatter feeder as well, again. It's going to throw it around in a 360. What we have on this is we have baffles that come shipped with it. So we're shown in here with 3 baffles. If you put 4 on, it's just going to drop it straight down. We actually have some people that are using these on the side of docks. They're using them for fish feed. It becomes an economical way to feed fish.
So that feeder's
$299.
$299. Okay. It holds up to how much fish food?
This will hold 50 pounds.
Really? Wow. Okay. All right. Then let's see. We're about to run out of time, so let's walk back down here and look at some more things.
The other thing, Bob, I might mention while you're here, is road feeders.
Oh, those are very
road
cool.
feeders become extremely popular.
So you put those on the back of your hunting
You
vehicle.
can put them on the back of the UTV or on the trucks. They come in different capacities. We're showing it here in a 100-pound and a 50-pound. It's important that we do some things a little bit differently than everybody else. We have a wireless remote control on it to operate it. It also has 2 different powers. Most people, you plug it into a cigarette lighter or something. With ours, you can just take a 12-volt battery, operate it anywhere. So you can operate on battery or plug it right into power.
All right. And then over here, what do you got here? This is the protein, the same protein feeder.
These are the protein feeders, different capacities.
Okay, I got you. All right.
Then as far as the other products that we produce, you can see there, Bob, that's our brand new blind there.
Here,
timber on there.
so here's a blind here. Then you guys just made came up with a deal with a camo company, right?
Yeah.
True Timber Camo.
This is True Timber, and
So you guys sell blinds as well.
we sell blinds. We sell blinds in all different capacities and all different price points.
And so really, these you can call this a hunting blind, but I know there's some ranches along the coast that they're selling some bird watching tours, and this is what they've got set up for people to look at birds.
You know, over 60 years ago, the way our company started originally, Bob, was that we were doing, we built for the state of Texas, we were building observation posts for them to count deer in different populations. That's really how this design started out here, that they were building observation posts. And it started out in a 4x4, and then we made them in a 4x8. We made them in sliding doors, then we also introduced full doors that open up, and then we evolved all the way over to what we have over there.
All right. Well, hey, folks, pretty good session there. Dale?
Appreciate you, Bob.
Appreciate
Thank
you, buddy.
you.
Glad you came in, and be sure and click like and share this video.
And send in